Thanks. All right, so introducing our first speaker, we have Rich Ring joining us. Rich Ring is Chief Botanist for the New York Natural Heritage Program. Prior to joining NYNHP in 2006, he earned a bachelor's in biology from Earlham College and a master's in forest ecology at the University of Michigan, and worked for the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program as an ecologist. Before his current position with the New York Natural Heritage, he worked on a variety of projects, including rare plant inventory in state forests and later state parks, boreal bird distribution, creating the first coefficients of conservatism for native New York plants, and the National Wetland Conditions Assessment. Currently, he conducts fieldwork across New York State and each year compiles New York's rare plant status list. Please welcome Rich Ring.
Thanks, everybody. Let me raise this up a little bit. Does that sound not too loud? Okay. Thanks very much to LIISMA for having me. My focus is rare plants, and I think a lot of botanists in my position are sort of they're interested in rare plants and native plants, and then note, oh, this terrible invasive plant. I hope somebody takes care of that. And you guys are the ones who take care of that. So I really appreciate it. Also, just to start off on the right foot, my title is a lie. I'm not so much going to talk about rare plants of Long Island and their invasive threats, because you guys know the invasive threats better than I do. And I want to learn, and I already have been learning and listening to what you're up to, but I am going to talk about rare plants and how we decide what is rare and some of the unique habitats on Long Island. And we've been doing field work this week, seeing some places that are more intact and less intact and have invasives. And I'm really interested in going forward collaborating with LIISMA. Let's see. Perfect, thank you. So it's important that you memorize, oops. To automatically go? Okay, good. It's important you memorize this slide with all these arrows going in both directions that I don't really understand. But just a brief explanation, the New York Natural Heritage Program, despite emails coming from the New York State DEC, we are a semi-independent organization. We're a nonprofit. Heritage programs were started by the Nature Conservancy back in the 80s. And that relates to all of this, to both invasive species management and management in general, because the Nature Conservancy started acquiring properties and conserving things, which was great, and realized, hey, how do we know what to get and accept and what to buy and how not, and came up with the idea for sort of a biological survey that became heritage programs. And now there's 50 heritage programs in all the states. And somehow we're able to incorporate into state government in most places. And in New York, we do have a lot of support from state government. We sit, most of us, in the DEC building, also get support from state parks. But we're an independent entity now associated, since we left the Conservancy, with SUNY ESF. And we get a little bit of funding also from the feds to work on federally endangered species, and also private foundations. And there's just one of our offices. We work all around the state. There's 5 or 6 prisons, something like that. What's that? 8. Oh my goodness. That's a lot of people. There's 2 botanists. There's myself and Kyle Webster, who works primarily in state parks. And this summer we have Tomas, who is here working with us for a summer. But all of that, I guess, is preview for my apologizing for not answering your emails. There's only one of us working statewide on private and most lands, and one of us working in state parks. So we need your help identifying these rare plant locations, and even more so hearing about how they're doing. So the question I get asked a lot is, how do you guys know what is rare? Which remained kind of a mystery to me for most of the time that I had this job. I was just going and looking for this list of things. That's what's rare. But just, many of you may know this, but just to gloss over it quickly, we like to rank things. We have global ranks for things that seem to be rare, just all over, as in they may be in danger of extinction. So G1 would be the rarest thing in imminent danger of extinction. G5 is secure on a global basis. There aren't too many globally rare species in New York, although there are a few. But we'll focus more on state ranks, or we call them S ranks. Again, S5 would be common and widespread. S1, usually fewer than 10 populations around the state. And Long Island is really a concentration of rare species. Many things reach their northern limit, and a few things reach their southern limit, and it's just such a unique set of habitats that we're going to talk about. We also rank things SH, as it used to be in New York, and maybe it still is, but no one's seen it in a very long time. And because there's just one of us, we have a lot of things that are ranked. Oh, well, this is S1 or S2, but maybe no one's seen it since the Heritage Program started or in the first 5 or 10 years, and we're getting old, myself included. And so we're beginning to debate, well, is this SH if no one's seen it in 30, 40 years, or is it still at this site? And as I said, we don't have enough people to keep track of that very well. And SX is presumed extirpated as it's gone and under a parking lot, although happily, every once in a while, someone does find something that we thought was SX, and so it becomes S1 again. Just very quickly, how do you know what's rare? Or this section I'm going to go through, which is famous great dead white men of New York botany. We need to diversify botany for sure, and that's happening, but it needs to happen more. So early on, John Torrey published the first and so far the only flora of the state of New York. And this is important. You have to know what's there before you know what's rare, right? And so John Torrey, very famous, he was the first botanist of the New York State Natural History Survey and later the State Museum, what became the state botanist. That's not a heritage botanist, that's a state museum position. David Warrior, a very skilled botanist in central New York, is working on a flora now, but it's still not finished. So this is the first complete flora of New York. And then going on, we had just a few people in that position, state botanists of the museum, and they slowly began to decide what was rare. This is what we call the house cards, which you still are consulting to this day. And so the curator of that museum in Albany started going through and making these check sheets. This is very early 20th century locality. You know, this is not very good for GPS. And he made these maps. Now, if you want to go find a plant and say it's there, that's a little rough, right? But that to some extent is our task. Some of these have good locations, such and such pond, barren. Some of them just say the town. So going back and trying to track these down, it's kind of a fun treasure hunt, but often difficult. Moving on, the very first time someone tried to make a rare plant list because New York State was saying, okay, what's rare? How can we protect it? It was in the 70s. This is Stanley Smith, the curator of botany. And this was the last curator until just, I think, 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago. Finally, State Museum, after the New York Flora Association hassled him for years, said, you need to fill this position. Dr. James Lendemer, who is an excellent botanist, is now the curator of botany there. But he specializes in lichens. So then in the early 80s, Dr. Richard Mitchell, he was the last botanist and published the first rare plants. But since 2001, it's fallen kind of to the Heritage Program to revise this list. And we do revise it generally every year that we've had funding. And why does it need revision? Well, if you put something out on a list and say this is rare, people take an interest and go and find more of it and say, okay, it's less rare. And also by the same token, things that were more common are beginning to disappear. Sometimes because of invasive plants, sometimes because of deer, sometimes because of reasons we don't understand. So the list is constantly evolving. So this is the list from just last year reviewed, and hopefully we'll get another review out at the end of this year. And the original list just incorporated the State Museum, but now we're lucky enough to have herbarium collections online. This is the New York Botanical Garden, and a very important collection. And you can see the actual specimens, and you can go to the Bronx and look at these physically. And if you're lucky, the label is legible, because most of them really aren't. And if you're lucky, the label has a good locality on it. But this is still used, and what it's been used for is to generate maps of where these things are, both historically and currently. So this is a map of what we rank as, well, not the plant, but the occurrence would be a historical occurrence. And you can see Long Island, there's mass of yellow, right? Long Island was developed later, has all this unique habitat, and the collections from Long Island in the early 20th century are really quite amazing. And there in the corner, that's Calypso orchid, which is another SX thing that we hope to find again one day. Oh, and going back just to the very beginning, anyone recognize this guy? Type of plant? Orchid? Yes. So this is Arethusa bulbosa. It gets called dragon mouth orchid, or to its friend bunny ears orchid. You can see the lateral petals poking up there. And there's a dozen historical records from Long Island, even fairly far west into this area in Manorville. There's one location left in Montauk, and we thought it was gone. And my predecessor as a state parks botanist was very determined and thrashed through the shrub swamp in Montauk, and lo and behold, it is still there. So even things that we think are gone, we have hope of recovering them. And now we're getting information coming at us from iNaturalist. And I feel like botany, or field botanist, has become a little bit less of a cult, or maybe I'm counting myself, less of a weird hobby than it used to be. And it's amazing the volume of data in iNaturalist that comes up there. It's a little problematic. The locations of rarities aren't necessarily there. And also it is anonymous, and you don't necessarily have to reach out to the user and verify. But it's an incredible source of data, and it's really changing things that we thought were rare. People who are interested are putting pictures up on iNaturalist, and it's hard for us to keep up and keep revising these ranks based on that. It's too much data in a way, but a very powerful tool. So that's how we decide what is rare. We keep deciding and changing our mind. Now I'm going to talk about a few specific Long Island habitats and the rare plants associated with them. And you guys can think about what's going on there and causing problems and how we can help. So here's a few interesting rarities in the last few years. On the upper left, that's Seaside Angelica. And that's just the fruit. It's a carrot family thing. So, you know, you might recognize, looks a little bit like Queen Anne's lace seeds, right? But it's a bigger, more robust plant. And interestingly, it grows on beaches, but also likes shade, or at least it grows adjacent to the ocean, but likes shade. And think of where you have that in New York. You have that in Maine, where this is not rare, but you don't have a lot of that in New York. It would have been the North Shore, where you have steeper moraines coming down, right? There's one supposedly extant record on the North Fork. There's records near Orient Beach. So if you see a big, tall Angelica in that neck of the woods, check it out. We hope that it's there. We did find it on Fisher's Island. We did it for the last couple of years. Fisher's Island, even though it's closer to Connecticut, is part of Suffolk County funded. The museum there funded us to do some work. And in the upper right corner, that's a plant that we get made fun of for talking about these names, the large calyx goosefoot. There's nothing funny about that. And these are the seeds, beautiful sort of, that's a millimeter scale, so they're quite tiny, but beautiful starfish-shaped sort of seeds. It's a rare plant, and it's growing at the top of the rack line. Again, Fisher's Island, multi-million-dollar homes, very undeveloped beaches. And so there's a lot of rare plants that we're growing on these places people like to recreate. How can we do both? We don't need more millionaires and more exclusive beaches, but we need to figure out how to share these places with plants successfully. Another plant growing right there, pretty much at the top edge of the rack line or the high tide line, is sea beach sandwort. Really interesting plant. It's clonal. It looks almost like a sedum or a stone crop. It's very what's the word, succulent looking, but then the flowers look like a tiny sandwort flower if you're familiar with sandworts. And again, it's a habitat thing. Probably this would be all over quiet bayside beaches were it not for development. And sea beach amaranth, which some people may have been involved in surveys of that. This is federally endangered, and the feds have coordinated in the past. My position, the Heritage Program, has done surveys. It's all the way from New York City out to the North Fork and the Hamptons. And it's an annual, even though it gets, about this high and spreads out for several meters. It's an annual plant, rides on storms, the seeds germinate, and it does everything it needs to do in a single year. And New York has the most of this plant in the whole world. It is somewhat globally rare. Hamptons beaches, it's a big deal to try to conserve this thing, and big challenges involved. And you guys, that's a little blurry, but you guys probably know as much as I. This is Asiatic sand sedge, which is an invasive species threatening to these beaches. First appeared, I think, on Staten Island. It's also in the Rockaways. It's clonal, so a challenge to control. So if you see this further east on beaches, it'd be a great thing, I guess, to early detect, or at least to note and work on. Moving on to other Long Island habitats with rare plants, pine barrens and grasslands, or given fire suppression to varying degrees of success, right? We've had wildfires in the last couple of years on Long Island. Replacing fire to some extent has been bulldozers, also power line scrapes, anything to get away, to scrape away litter and get down to mineral soil. And one of the plants that favors that, and I wish I had a scale for you because these are very tiny, it's called pixie moss or pixie cup. It's not a moss, but the leaves are so small, they look almost like mosses. The flowers are about the size of a nickel. Just 2 sites in New York. One was a big extensive site at Connecticut State Park following a burn 30 years ago. I was there just this spring. We found it one smaller than this table, seems to be all that's left. Not threatened by invasives, but just threatened by succession and the lack of fire. They are doing some management there to try and take back, even though it's native species, to provide some more open habitat. And the other site is a cell radio tower site, all fenced off, and it got bulldozed and scraped, and the diversity there is amazing. So we make do with what we can as far as rare habitats now in a landscape that's so different than where these plants have evolved. Also, grasslands. Hempstead Plains is not very far from here. Hempstead Plain grasslands. It's been monitored for quite some time because of botanical interest. Again, going through the years, 1972 had 8 invasive species. Our office did an inventory in 2017, had 34 invasive species. One of the sort of main culprits was Asian bush clover, and I saw this driving out. I think that was it. Always be careful of 30-mile-an-hour plant ID. But in the road shoulder, it seems to be doing very well on the North Shore, and it's an aggressive spreader as well. And another federally threatened species is sandplain agellinus, or Agellinus acuta, or now Agellinus decimloba, which is 10 lobes. So you see these 5 petals, and it's got a little bump, 2 lobes per petal, and you get to decimloba. Beautiful plant, semi-parasitic plant. We're hoping to get federal funding. I've been talking with LIISMA in the last couple of weeks to try and restore some of this habitat. There's a site for it at Shadmore State Park with a beautiful kiosk describing the plant, but management, since the Nature Conservancy is less active and state parks hasn't been able to keep up with it, the plants don't seem to be there, but they're in the seed bank. This is a seed banker, so we're hoping that with management, this can come back. And this is a great band name, I think. If you're thinking of starting a band, try naming it Pine Barrens Death Camas. I think people come out. This was an SX plant. That is, we thought it was all gone. It was collected in the early 20th century, and that habitat is ruined. And a botanist from the Park Service was poking around searching for orchids at Connecticut State Park, found some funny looking leaves and got really curious, and it turned out to be this plant. It's in the lily family. As you can imagine, you don't want to eat something called death camas. A lot of the lilies are poisonous, but that's one population. Plant was thought to be gone, maybe in another dense tick-infested patch of pine barrens, there's more pine barrens death camas. Oops. Okay, yeah. And finally, the other site that Tomas and I have been exploring this week, coastal plain ponds. And I saw some great pictures and was chatting a little bit about sites. It's amazing to be in Long Island, surrounded by the traffic, et cetera, and go to one of these places and you feel like you can't hear or see anything. You don't see a person, even if you're there just 100 feet off the trail all day. There's 46 rare species in New York, 3 globally rare ones, and some that have been lost. These are the main groups or areas on Long Island. They all have a similar flora, but they don't all actually have the same. So each one differs a little bit, and they differ somewhere in their geology too. Allegedly, they're all kettle holes. I don't know if people know kettles and cames. This idea is sort of a simplified version of Long Island. Long Island is so young. You go to the Adirondacks, you can touch like a Precambrian rock, the oldest rocks. And Long Island didn't exist 13,000 years ago, right? The sea level was lower. And this moraine, the retreating glacier, left a big pile, and then sort of downstream of that, left these outwash plains and little chunks of ice melted out, pressed down the land, and became these small kettle lakes. The ones out here around Sag Harbor are very clearly kettles. They have cames next to them. Came is sort of the pile of sand that melted out of the ice block, and the kettle is the pool of water that's left. There's sort of a rabbit hole I went down about this. Some of the shallower ones don't really look like this in the Riverhead and Calverton area. It's been proposed that comets hitting the glacier about 11,000 years ago, an event that sent the mammoths extinct, formed these Carolina bays. That is, these more subtle depressions, and some of them seem like that. So they're not steep-sided at all. But whatever the origin, there are places there the water is full in the spring. They're dependent on groundwater levels more than precipitation. They don't have an inflow or outflow. They usually don't have fish, and a unique set of plants are adapted to that particular habitat. So this is kind of what things looked like the last couple of days when we were looking there. Full in the spring at high water levels from recharge. And again, it can rain a lot and not necessarily affect this because it's responding to the surrounding groundwater levels. In the 1980s, the Nature Conservancy began buying a lot of these areas. Some of them have later been turned over each to the state or become county park. I think the ones that we were talking about earlier have been worked on. Invasive species weren't mentioned. And I have to say, some of these still look very, very good. And we were noting Phragmites populations that seem small enough, and I know that we should confer more. And I realized that I don't have a good idea on how the prisons and LIISMA actually makes decisions about where to go. And you're super busy, but we'd love to, communicate more about that and work together. So this is some of the rare species that occur in these ponds. My colleague Tomas turned up one of these a couple of days ago. I was very excited. You have to kind of be a geek to love a plant that just sits up with green. This isn't necessarily a rose, I understand that, but those feathery stigmas sticking out of spike rushes are very pretty if you get a hand lens. That's my one plea to everyone: buy a hand lens, $30 or $40. This whole world will open up to you. And a plant press, if you can get your bosses to buy your plant press. So that's the world of spike rushes. Again, if you have a hand lens, this diversity of shape, these crazy monk's caps and dunce caps and other funny shaped tubercles, they're all magnified very much, but they're very, very different and diverse once you adjust for how tiny they are. Also more dramatic, blooming right now in these vernal pools. On the right, Virginia meadow bluety, that is out right now. It's beautiful. Rose coreopsis, also out right now. Rose coreopsis also likes wet power lines, so they're making do where they can. And a couple more rarities known from coastal plain ponds. The globe-fruited Lockwickia. I was out one of the sites with Abby last year. We saw this just yesterday. Ladies' tresses are a little difficult to identify. Tomas and I came to blows slightly over identifying this one the other day, but I think it's nodding ladies' tresses. And also out right now, many bladderworts. And these are plants that only the flower is above the water. The bottom has tiny, tiny leaves with tiny, tiny bladders that catch protozoa and little swimming bugs in order to supplement. These are low nutrient environments. And so in order to get a little nitrogen, they catch bugs. But this is the time of year to go out to coastal plain ponds. August, September, October, when the water level drops enough in a dry year like this one, everything emerges. They're mostly annual plants. And these striking orchids, formerly found in coastal plain ponds, there's just one population, I think, of each of these species left. The orange fringed orchid, again, it needs disturbance. And so how to manage for disturbance. We don't like to see things bulldozed, but we can't burn everything now. How to provide habitat for these disturbance requiring species. An orange crested orchid is at Connecticut and just a few other places. Tall, dramatic plants, and the only locations in New York for both of these. And last year on a NIFO walk that I led, we came upon, and I think someone from LIISMA was there and pointed out water lettuce. Wondering how it got there to this isolated park near Sag Harbor. Maybe someone had just dumped it from an aquarium, but starting to spread around the margin of the pond. So for me at least, and it's been some years, back in school, a sort of ethic was, well, you've got what humans touch, and that's beautiful and full of amazing things. I mean, what's untouched, the wilderness, and then you've got humans ruining it. And that was sort of the dichotomy. And I really appreciate what LIISMA is doing and the prisons are doing to try and correct that, to try and say, no, we're a part of this, and we can contribute to this in a non-destructive way. And so this is a tool that our office, which in addition to, again, rare species, we host IMAP invasives, those who work for LIISMA I know collaborate with. There's a tool that they developed called the Rare Invasive Species Intersection, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's saying what of those places I showed you before, all those dots on the map, are there invasive species near them? And basically, if it's got color, if it's not just white in the middle, the answer is yes. And I would say probably even more than that, because they're just using data where we know they're invasive, and that was noted in a survey. And some of those records are old. So they're growing together, and figuring out how to manage that together is a challenge. And again, if you manage a smaller area, the prisons already have access to this tool, but say you're on a land trust and there's a rare species, or you think there might be, we could share this with you for your particular area, and it will show you not just where the rare plants might be in your area, because anyone with ownership, we share those data freely, but also share what invasives have been recorded nearby, either from IMAP invasives or from our own surveys. Yeah, 28%. And I think that's low. I think it's probably a much higher percentage have invasive of rarities, have invasives nearby. This problem is relatively new. Certainly, with the arrival of Europeans to this country, they were bringing invasive species with them very early, but it's been accelerating so much more rapidly with trade in the last 30 or 40 years. And I was able to go to the PRISM talk at the St. Lawrence PRISM earlier this year in June at that meeting, and their guest speaker was Dr. Robin Wald Kimmerer. I don't know if anyone knows, everyone familiar with that. She wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. Anybody? Thumbs up. I know, and you're stuck listening to me. They had Robin Wald Kimmerer. But she really asked some provocative questions coming from a different perspective. And I'm not there yet, but I think they're worth asking. And so I have some quotes that I jotted down from that. And then as I was making this talk, they came back to me. And one of us, right off, you're working on this already, and kudos to you. It's not enough to conserve the remnants, we need to heal the damage. And that's what a lot of this work is. And I was interested in hearing the techniques you're using were mostly like not pesticide based, which I found really encouraging. You're not adding damage or potential damage. Not that there isn't potentially some role for that, but I was interested in hearing all the different techniques. Are they newcomers rather than exotic invasives? That's hard for me. I'm not there yet. Like I see Phragmites, I'm like, ooh, bad. Well, I found these rare plants. Ooh, there's this patch, bad. But it's all one thing, right? It's all one thing. And to some extent, how we integrate with these newcomers is a big difference. In a lot of cases, perhaps, and this is happening with emerald ash borer, and there are some other success stories like with purple loosestrife. Long time ago, when I was in college, purple loosestrife was like enemy number one, the worst invasive. You drive past these fens, and it's just all purple loosestrife. And they introduced a native beetle to where purple loosestrife is from, and it has not eliminated purple loosestrife, but it has made it, quote unquote, better behaved, and is no longer dominating ecosystems. And so that sort of integrated pest management would be a scientific way to say it, but sort of being more inclusive would be another way to say it. Finding how perhaps these newcomers can form a less destructive role in the environment. And I know this is hard. The Japanese Angelica tree, oh my God, that's just, first of all, you get within 10 feet of it and it's stabbing you. And it's very dominant, spread by birds. But are there ways to think of this to sort of include these newcomers in our world? And what's leading to invasives being somewhere? What's the history of that patch of land? Was it used badly for agriculture and abandoned? And I take hope from people's gardening efforts. Native plant gardening is touching on, but just the idea that every piece of land is all connected to the piece of land adjacent, and it's all the same chemicals flowing through all of us. There's really one thing. I'll start harping on that, but those are some of the thoughts that Robin Wald Kimmerer was introducing that I think I'm finding helpful in reframing this. Again, the cranberry bogs of Long Island, part of the history. This week I've been down a rabbit hole with this. We were visiting the old cranberry bogs, which are now a nature preserve, and that LIISMA is going to visit next year. On the road in, I got a text from Tomas. Look, there's this orchid on the side of the road. This is ranked S2. There's fewer than 20 populations of this. This is a lady's tress. This is orchid, Spiranthes tuberosa, thank you. Growing on the side of the road here. It doesn't, probably the fact that there is a road there and it's maintained is providing some of this habitat, especially for the ladies' tresses. They do need disturbance, and that's true of a lot of orchids. So again, there's one of me, and we're a small office. When you find things, after you convince your boss to buy you a hand lens and a plant press, we want to hear about it. On our website, which is nynhp.org, there's a rare species reporting form. It's not too painful. It's relatively simple. Just a picture and some coordinates to start is enough. If you have an idea of how big it is, big the population is, that's great too. But we'd love to hear that and update our data. Field botany resources. For not quite all, but most of the rare plants in New York, we have conservation guides, which will help with ID. There's diagrams or pictures. There's which species are similar. We like to provide that. Many of you have probably used Go Botany. That's an online site, but it's for New England, not New York. Works pretty well on Long Island, though. And then you didn't realize it, but Long Island, according to Alan Weekly, the botanist in the Southeast Long Island, is now part of the Southeast because they've expanded their northern tier. And this is available as an app. And it's a different approach. The keys are often based on different characters. So if you're having trouble in Go Botany, I recommend trying the northern tier app of the Southeastern Flora site, just as you go out and start puzzling these out. Whether invasive, it includes invasive and native species. So that's what I've got for now. I don't know at all how I am on time, but I'm happy to take questions if we have some. Good. Thank you. Questions? Rebuttals? Yeah. I'm trying to think of the practical answer versus the official answer. Because I did not do my homework and contact all of the authorities this week. And they are accessible. I would not collect from them. Right. And I would be careful also about transferring seeds from one to the other. I'm sure this crowd is all about knowing that, but wash your stuff. But many of them are in county parks. And the county park ones especially tend to be more accessible. And there are some private ones, but many of them are preserved. And if you go and you see something rare, we'd love to hear about it because we're looking at these records and our information is from 1985. How is this possible? Well, there's not many of us. Um, I feel I'm relatively thin ice answering rare plant questions down here and rare insect questions. I'm really gonna punt. A lot of things spike and then recede to some extent, particularly insect populations. But certainly I have seen it spreading further up the Hudson Valley this year than I'd seen it before. So I don't know, ag and markets might have more insight into spotter lanternflies than I do. If we're lucky, some of our native, well, for that matter, invasive insectivores will start to develop a taste for these things. Or it's worrisome for the grapevines, probably. Yeah. Historically, no. But probably there should be, and we're starting to branch out. In New England, there's been a seed saving effort, and New York hasn't done that. We're cautious about reintroduction, or at least not reintroduction. We're cautious about moving things around. We want things to be natural, which is a troubling or a tricky word, obviously. What we do is we take a picture. If there's enough, we take a specimen and put it in a museum for further study and for proof that this really is what this is, since every graduate student has to lump or split a species. And these rules are changing all the time. But we're proposing right now with a couple of the federal species to start moving seeds and transplanting just very close by to sort of improve the odds of germination. But I think it's a good potential effort in the future to do localized seed collection and, if not replanting, at least distribution. But typically, no, we take pictures and specimens.
Where can you access the COC list for planting?
Oh, I didn't list in the list of resources, but the New York Plant Atlas, which is nice. It includes, if you go to advanced search, you can sort by county and you can put in the COC values. You can add and subtract whatever you want from the atlas. Yeah. Other questions?
Rob, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Hi, Rich. Just wanted to ask a couple of questions and also an update on our end. We actually did the Agilinus survey this morning at the Hempstead Plains prior to me joining this meeting. I don't know if you're still in town today. We could talk offline if you want to stop by on your way back or tomorrow. I don't know how long you're here. But one thing we've been having trouble with, I also work for the town of Hempstead. We manage the beaches in Lido on Long Beach Island. We definitely have Asiatic sand sedge and some controllable populations that we, hand dig out as we can. There is an established population at one of the town parks that we've been reluctant to do anything with because we're afraid of more spread. But now we're dealing with some erosion issues on that beach, and I worry that that's going to lead to more spread, which might be something worth talking about in the future. But also in our managed shorebird areas where there is annual scraping of the plants to prevent succession, to keep colonizing nesting birds still in there. But kind of an unintentional result of that has been the spread of dusty miller, which seems to be replacing some of the annual plants like sea rocket and even sea beach amaranth. And forget about sea beach knotweed. We haven't seen that, in about a dozen years on this site, but used to have really strong populations. So just wondering if you had any insight or seeing, anything different in other sites across Long Island. I know, in sites very close to us, the amaranth populations are still very high. So I worry that some of our management is actually kind of messing with some of that natural ability for the amaranth to come and go. But we haven't had too many major storms in the last, 10 years, which isn't the worst thing. So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I can't pretend to be much of an expert on the dusty miller. I do see it taking over certain places. I don't know much about control efforts on that. Maybe LIISMA folks would know more. And the sea beach knotweed and for that matter, the amaranth, it's hard to predict with these annuals. There's sort of always hope that the next storm will bring a lot of seeds and bring in a new flush of either of those things. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm pleased you're working on the Asiatic sand sedge, and measuring whether that's helping spread invasives. Yeah, that's a good question.
The fear is where it's growing in the dune, that dune is eroding. So if that dune gets taken out in a storm, that might spread that sand sedge further down the beach, whether that's east, west, or just locally. So, it's something we really can't avoid right now. It's more just in a monitoring sort of thing, but
Yeah,
we could talk more offline. We have a lot of data down on the South Shore here and certainly looking for integrated solutions, between LIISMA, we work very closely with them. So, looking at these coastal areas are important to us. A lot of them are engineered now with Army Corps projects, so kind of like extirpates species on its own because the forebeach is about 2 feet higher in many places due to this, Army Corps engineering. But in the natural areas, I still think there's a lot of hope for rare plants.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'd love to connect more. Definitely shoot me an email and we can chat offline.